and get started. Thanks everyone for joining us today for this coast training focused on resilience tools to address heat. My name is Andrew. I work for Mississippi State University Extension. I'm supported through Mississippi Alabama Sea Grant Consortium. And a big part of what I do is I work with coastal stakeholders on building resilience to all sorts of future climate conditions, things like future flooding, but also one of the emerging things that we've been talking about is heat. Heat's been a huge discussion as of late with increasing heat trends across the country. A lot of our coastal stakeholders are looking for tools that can help them address heat concerns. So a big part of what I do now is I showcase these types of tools to a lot of our coastal stakeholders throughout the Gulf. So today I'm going to go through just a few tools that stakeholders like yourself might be able to use for resilience planning, whether it's designing projects, trying to communicate different type of information to the public, or coming up with different types of planning documents or other types of resources that you may be using for the city. And so before we get started, this webinar is available for 1 CFM credit. The only thing that we're asking is that you can participate in a few questions throughout the presentation as we're going along. So even if you're not looking to get the CFM credit, we'd still like to invite everyone to participate in these questions. All right, so I want to go over some of the logistics for today before we really get into the meat of this presentation. So like I had mentioned, there is 1 CFM credit available for this webinar. There'll be a few questions scattered throughout the presentation, so just please make sure you answer these engagement questions if you're looking to get that CFM credit. And like I said, even if you're not looking to get the CFM credit, we're always looking to get that information because it makes sure that we can make these presentations as useful as possible for y'all in the future. We'll be covering 3 different online tools today. We'll spend about 10 to 15 minutes on each tool, and I'll be giving you a brief summary of what each tool does, as well as walking you through some screenshots that highlight various functions within the tools. The best way how to learn these tools, of course, is to fiddle with them yourself. So if you can please follow along by pulling up the tools as we go through them. I'm going to make sure to go through these demonstrations of each of these tools nice and slow so that you'll be able to follow along. The links to each tool will be provided in the presentation. I've also provided QR codes so that if you wanted to follow along on your phone as well, you can also do that. We're also going to be recording this presentation, so you'll have access to rewatch this presentation if you want to go back at a later time and look at some of these tools. If you have questions about the tools, you can type them in the chat. I'll do my best to answer each of these questions as we go along, but keep in mind, I am not the developer of each of these tools. I'm simply helping to highlight these tools for our federal and regional partners. So if you'd like more in-depth answers to your questions, we can connect you with those tool developers. After each tool, we're going to take a small break to answer any questions in the chat. And at that time, we're also going to make sure that we ask you questions for those credits as well. And if you have any questions at the end of the presentation, we'll also have a brief moment at the end of the presentation if you have any questions at the end. And at the end of this presentation, we also have a brief survey and evaluation that we'd very much appreciate you take the time to fill out. Like I said, we're always looking to improve these presentations. So if you find ways that we can actually improve this, please, we'd like to know what it is that we can do. All right, so first of all, I want to introduce myself. Like I said, my name is Andrew Medhurst. I work with a program called PLACE, which is a long acronym that stands for Program for Local Adaptation to Changing Environments. Our program is supported through Mississippi State University Extension and Mississippi Alabama Sea Grant Consortium. And our overarching mission is to increase community resilience to changing conditions and help communities understand the risk associated with various hazards and impacts. So my job revolves around 3 main components. First is understanding risk. We work with researchers, federal partners, and universities to get the most up-to-date science. We then communicate that risk. We digest that information and package it in different ways to communicate with various different coastal decision makers. Depending on our audience, we communicate this information in different ways. And lastly, we facilitate action. It's not enough to just understand and communicate information, but we need to take action as well. So we leverage our network of stakeholders and resources throughout the Gulf to help plan projects, write planning documents, and conduct events that can help to address these various types of risks. So as I mentioned, a huge part of my job is sifting through the numerous types of tools and information that exist on the internet. If you've ever tried Google searching for resilience tools, you'll find that there's a lot of different tools out there. Every month there are new tools that are coming out, and these tools are designed for different types of coastal professionals with different functions, different outputs, and different data, depending on what it is you're looking for. So the big question that we're often asked is, which tool should I be using? So today, this webinar is focused specifically on tools to address heat. We'll be looking at 3 tools today. The first one is going to be the National Weather Service's Heat Risk Tool. The second is the CDC's Heat and Health Tracker. And then third, we have NOAA's Climate Explorer. I'm going to go through each of these tools and showcase the features that make them useful, as well as information on how that tool works, and also a short demonstration of how to use the functions within each tool. I've also included a couple of real-world case study examples of how these tools can be applied to actual scenarios you might be facing in your day-to-day operations. If you attended one of the previous webinars that we conducted on tools, one of the pieces of feedback that we got is we want to know how to use these tools in actual real-world scenarios. So I included a few different situations on how you can actually apply these tools to an actual real-life example. So we're going to go ahead and get started by talking about the National Weather Service and the Heat Risk Tool. The link for the tool will be in the chat. I'll also it's along the top here if you want to just type it into your search bar. There's also a QR code, as you can see here, that will allow you to scan it on your phone if you want to follow along on your phone. These tools today all work pretty well on your phone. So if you're wanting to just watch the presentation and follow along on a different device, that works as well. So think of this tool as, do we need to act this week? This is a brand new tool that is still in its developmental phase, so it's not quite finished yet, but it's close enough that you can still utilize it to assess short-term heat-related forecasts. This tool works by combining weather, climate, and health data to identify dangerous conditions that could be detrimental to human health. Think of it kind of working like a weather app on your phone by giving you a 7-day outlook that ranges the projected heat risk on a 5-tiered scale, ranging from no risk to extreme risk. The things to keep in mind about this tool and understanding how it works is it does not use heat index and it does not use wet bulb globe temperature. These are 2 common ways to measure heat. But because of the limitations of these, this tool actually uses several other different ways to actually look at heat. One of the issues is there's not enough stations across the country that measure the hourly humidity, so heat index is often difficult to measure. Heat index also doesn't account for excessive warm nights, and that's an increasing trend we've been seeing specifically in the Gulf, is we've been seeing a lot more warm nights. So our heat index doesn't actually account for these excessive warm nights, whereas this tool will actually account for that. What this tool is doing is it's comparing the daily highs and lows and comparing that to the historical averages for that same period. And what you end up seeing is the top 5% of temperatures that are used as a threshold and classified according to CDC's heat health data, which is used to determine the risk to human health. While this tool doesn't directly measure humidity, it's using temperature and a dew point relationship to approximate humidity levels. So like I mentioned, it's comparing daily high and low temperatures and comparing that to past historical averages. And when we're looking at the top 5% of those temperature thresholds, that's when you're starting to see these color changes in this map here. So I'll show you how this works here in 1 second. And like I mentioned, it's not directly using humidity, but we're able to use temperature and dew point relationships to approximate that humidity. So I want to give you a quick demonstration of how this tool works. This is what essentially you'll see when you open the tool. You can see a map of the United States, and it's color-coded based off of the risk, ranging from 0 to 4. You can click and drag and pan around this map, and you can actually zoom into specific regions that you're curious about. So let's say, for example, we wanted to zoom in and look at Florida as a whole. You can go ahead and click and zoom. You can see in the top left corner, there's a plus and minus button that allows you to zoom in. And then you can also just click and pan around to move around the map. So as we zoom into Florida, you can really start to see the colors that are emerging here that differentiate between the minor, moderate, major, and extreme heat conditions. So as we zoom in and see a finer resolution, you can see some areas around Orlando are experiencing higher heat risk. So remember, this is looking at comparisons between historic averages on that specific day. So we can see that Thursday, September 25th, we're actually seeing increases in the expected heat risk compared to our historical averages. And in some of those areas around Orlando right now, you can actually see that it's ranking higher on that scale as a major heat risk comparatively with the rest of Florida that's in some of those moderate and minor heat risks. One of the things that you can also do is you can use this search bar on the top left to actually find a specific address. So if you wanted to type in your home address, or if you wanted to type in a different type of location that you're curious about, you can use that search bar right there and it'll actually zoom into that specific region. So let's say, for example, I work at the Mississippi State University Coastal Research and Extension Center in Biloxi, Mississippi. So if I type in that exact address, the tool will zoom in on that specific location and provide me with a 7-day forecast of the heat risk for that exact area. So here's what that looks like. This can take a minute to load sometimes, depending on your location. Remember, this tool is still in its developmental phase, so be patient as you're searching in that search bar. A lot of times it doesn't pop up immediately. What you can see here as we pull up this map is there is multiple different colors ranging from 0, which is low risk, which is going to be that kind of like lighter greenish shade. And then it goes increasing from yellow, orange, red to purple. And that's the highest level, which is indicating an extreme heat risk. You'll see there's a table on the left there that actually defines what specifically is associated with those heat-related impacts of each category. And then at the top left too, you can also see the 7-day forecast. You can click into each of those days and you can see the map actually changing color based on the heat risk for the next projected 7 days. So it almost acts kind of like one of the weather apps that you would be using on your phone. But remember, this is using different type of information than your typical weather app would be using. I'm going to go through this nice and slow so that everyone has a chance to kind of follow along as we're moving through this. One of the things that's important to know is to understand the color coding that we have on this scale. The colors range from low to high, and as the scale darkens, risk is increasing, meaning that the heat risk to human health is going to be higher. Each category on the scale is associated with various health effects and recommendations on how to prepare for these conditions. Something to keep in mind about heat risk is that it affects everyone differently. Children and the elderly are much more sensitive to heat, so it's important to understand the sensitivity of different demographics and groups within your region. And the next tool I'm actually going to go through is actually going to show you how you can look at those specific demographics. So while this is showing you the overall heat risk for a region, remember, it's important to understand specific areas within that region and how some areas may be more susceptible than others. Now you may be thinking, how can I use this tool in a real world scenario? So we're going to come up with some hypothetical case studies here. So let's say you work for the city of Mobile and they're planning an outdoor Mardi Gras parade for early next year. The organizers of the parade want to make sure that the heat conditions on the day of the parade are within reasonable limits. So the city decides to use the National Weather Service's heat risk to look at a 7-day forecast ahead of the scheduled event to see just what they should expect for heat on the actual day of the parade. So the event organizers look up the 7-day forecast and see that the day of the event, they're actually expecting moderate heat risk, which is higher than the typical average for that given day and historical averages. What the city can do then is they can decide to provide additional resources like cooling stations, water, and shade for attendees at the parade, and ensure that emergency health services are able to be on standby for the event, since the heat risk could pose a potential health risk for those attending the outdoor parade. Let's look at another hypothetical case study example. Let's say you organize field work for research. I know that we probably have some researchers in this call who conduct field work outside during the summer, and I know that it gets really, really hot out there. So let's say that you have a 5-day window to conduct at least 2 days of field work during any given week. You can use this tool to actually look up the 7-day forecast of heat risk for the week and see what the best days to actually conduct field work would be, and identify the hot days that maybe it would just be best to stay indoors, maybe do something else. So just like you look up rain conditions for the week and adjust accordingly, we can do the same thing with heat. You don't need to put yourself and those you work with in unnecessary risk when you know there will be other days during the week that will have lower risk from heat. So looking at the 7-day forecast, you see that Thursday and Monday of the next 7 days have a moderate heat risk, whereas every other day this week has only a minor heat risk. So based on this information, you can schedule your field work for one of the days that isn't going to have an increased heat risk, and ensure that you and your colleagues can avoid higher temperatures that could potentially be dangerous to human health. So we're going to take a quick pause. If anyone has any questions, now's the time to ask them in the chat. I'll close this window to look at that. And also too, we're going to also pop up a little question here about how has heat impacted you personally or professionally. Remember, whether you're looking to get the CFM credits or you're just participating as an observer, we're really curious to know the answers to these questions. So please answer them either way. And I'll give you all a minute just to complete that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on. So if you haven't answered that question, take your time. I think that chat window will still be up there to answer your question or to fill in your answers. All right, so next up, the next tool that we're going to be talking about is the CDC's Heat and Health Tracker. Remember, there's a QR code there, and the actual URL that you can type in is at the top there. This is a relatively new tool as well. It's not in developmental stage, but it was only released in the last couple of years. So we're really trying to showcase some of the things that this tool can do, specifically to identify health risk within certain demographics. So I mentioned that last tool. It shows you kind of the overall heat risk for a region. If you're looking at a larger scale, something like a county or a city, you can see that heat risk. But what happens if you want to look at the heat risk for specific census tracts, or kind of understand which demographics are going to be most at risk in a certain region? That's where this tool comes in. So that last tool looks at weekly forecasts of heat, but think of this tool as who is being impacted right now. This tool provides county level heat illness displayed in almost real time. So what it's doing is it's pulling census tract data and it's overlaying demographic data that also identifies individual census tracts that are most vulnerable to those heat conditions. This tool also nicely summarizes population characteristics when compared to the national average, so you can understand how specific counties compare to other regions of the country and how they may or may not be more at risk. Remember, this works at the county level scale, and it's displayed in real time or very close to real time. And it's using demographic overlays that allow you to look at who is most vulnerable within a region. And it also includes those population characteristics that I had mentioned. So the way this tool works is it's actually looking at emergency room visits. So it's basing this off of the number of heat-related emergency room illness visits per 100,000 emergency department visits. Since this is in near real time, you can actually see trends that are happening throughout the course of a week that allow decision makers to act accordingly. And since this tool pulls census data, we can see a breakdown of each county to understand the populations that might be more at risk to heat-related illnesses based on various characteristics like ethnicity or income. I'll now quickly show you how this tool actually works. So when you open the tool, you'll see a map displaying the current day's information. It's color-coded, once again, like the previous tool, based on the risk of heat-related illness ranging from none to extreme. Here you can view past days to see the daily heat-related illness trends. And remember, since this is looking at historical data and near-time actual data, it's not looking at future projections. So when you click that choose a date button there, it only allows you to look into the past. But that might be valuable depending on what it is that you're looking for. There may be trends over the last week where you knew that you had a heat wave and you want to look to see how it affected the emergency room visits associated with heat-related illnesses on those particular days. The real meat and potatoes of this tool is actually up at the top in that orange bar. This is where you can search by your county or by your zip code. This unfortunately does not allow you to search by city, but still using county data is still very, very useful. And so when you actually type in a county there, what it's going to take you to is something that looks like this. The first thing you'll see across the top, is the same heat risk information that we had just looked at with the previous tool. So you'll see here it's ranging the risk from no risk to an extreme risk, and it's color coded the exact same way that previous tool was. The big difference here is we don't have that map that the other tool provided to be able to look to see where that actual heat risk is in relation to your region. As you scroll down, though, you'll see something that looks like this. On the top right of the map, you'll see a drop-down menu that allows you to look at various different points of interest. It allows you to sort by things like hospitals, schools, and parks, and you'll see those overlaid on the map as those small dots. So right now the default is set to hospitals, so you see all those little purple dots around the map are indicating where the actual hospitals are. The legend on the bottom left corner there allows you to see the scale of heat risk that we had previously talked about. And one of the cool things is if you move your mouse over and look at that legend, you can actually toggle these on and off. So if you're just looking to see the areas that are most at risk, you can actually uncheck the low moderate, and then the moderate risk areas so that you can just see the highlighted areas that have a high or a very high heat risk. And then lastly, along the bottom, you can see the population characteristics of the county that you're looking to understand the demographics of and why they may be more prone to increased heat risk. So you can see there, it breaks it down based off of different types of demographic information like ethnicity, populations that have health insurance, populations that have limited English speaking ability, and then also the amount of the population that's living in poverty. So once again, this helps us kind of zoom in and look at some of the areas that are going to be most at risk when we're looking at who's actually going to be affected by these increases in heat risk. So once again, I want to go through a hypothetical case study scenario to see how you can apply this tool to something in real life. So let's say, for example, you're working for the city of Mobile. They now have cooling centers which they can open and deploy situationally. So the city's monitoring temperatures for the upcoming week using that 7-day heat risk forecast. And they know that there are going to be certain days that are going to have increased temperatures and therefore are going to have that associated increase in heat risk for their communities. But where do they deploy the cooling centers and how do they know which operational centers to actually open up? Because it's impractical to open up every single cooling station in the entire city. And they have a lot of mobile cooling stations that they need to know where to move those situationally. That may change on a different week depending on what's happening. So it's important to look to see where we should actually be moving these resources. So what the city can do is they can use the CDC Heat and Health Tracker to look at which census tracts face the greatest risk from heat. So remember, you're able to toggle on and off that legend there in the bottom left corner. It kind of cut off in this picture, but in this picture, what you see is I've toggled off the low, moderate, and the moderate heat risk, and I only showed the areas within Mobile that are in that high or very high heat risk. And then what I've also done is I've adjusted the points of interest, and instead of showing hospitals, I'm now showing all of the parks in the city. So the city can then look at this information, look to see where these parks are, and look to see which areas these parks are in areas that have the highest risk. And they can then open cooling centers and parks within those areas that have the highest heat risk, therefore allocating those resources accordingly to the areas that need it most. As you can see in this picture, there are multiple parks within the city's jurisdiction that are not in that high risk area. So we're going to make sure that we address the parks that have the highest risk, and we're going to open up the cooling stations and move those resources to those areas since we know they're going to be affected the greatest. Let's look at another case study example. Let's say you're working for Harrison County and you're a health official. You've noticed a spike in the number of heat-related emergency room visits during a recent heat wave that's hit in the last week. Health officials want to know which areas are seeing that highest risk so they can plan to provide staff assistance and resources to those areas that are most affected by the increasing heat. What we're going to do is we're going to use the CDC Heat and Health Tracker tool, and these health officials can then look at the current heat risk of each census tract in the county. Remember, because this is displayed in near real time, they're able to get very, very accurate information on where this is happening based on very recent data. And for points of interest, since we're looking at hospitals, let's go ahead and identify all of the hospitals within the county since we're knowing that there's an increase in the amount of heat-related illnesses that we're seeing in the emergency room. Let's look to see where those hospitals actually are to see if there's any correlation between areas that have the highest heat risk and where they're actually heading. Now with this information, health officials can prioritize assisting the areas that have the highest risk. So they may be looking at deploying mobile services that can address heat-related illnesses within specific communities, or they can just make sure to allocate additional professionals to make sure that they're able to accommodate all of the increases in the emergency room visits for that specific time period where they may see a heat wave that's increasing the amount of people they're experiencing those heat-related health effects. All right, now we're going to take another little pause. We're going to pop up another question here in the chat. And that question is, what heat impact concerns you most? Is it health related? Is it infrastructure related? Is it related to conducting field work outside? Do you work with school groups that are going to be doing outdoor activities in the afternoon? Depending on what your profession is, we're curious to know which specific way that heat's going to impact you and what's concerning most in your profession. And I'll take a chance to look at questions in the chat. I'll give you all a couple minutes to fill that one in. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next tool. I'll give you all a few more seconds to complete that question if you're still answering it. So the next tool we're going to be looking at is one of my personal favorites. This is the NOAA Climate Explorer. This tool was actually developed by an entire suite of organizations and federal partners. I've listed them all there to make sure we give credit to all of our federal partners. NOAA, NASA, USGS, and the EPA all contributed to this tool, as well as several other organizations. And this tool is particularly helpful for those out there that are doing planning documents, grant writing, or any types of presentations where they're doing outreach to the public or trying to demonstrate this information to groups that are interested in finding quick ways to demonstrate some of this information in a visual format. So once again, the link there is at the top for the URL. If you want to type that in, there's also a QR code if you want to follow along. So think of this tool as what will conditions look like in the next 20 to 50 years? This tool allows you to compare historical trends and also look at future projections of heat, in addition to several other climate variables. But remember, we're focusing on heat today, so I'm just going to talk about some of the heat-related functions of this tool. The Climate Explorer features interactive maps and graphs that allow you to easily visualize trends and projections at the county level. And the biggest feature of this tool is the ability to export this information as charts, graphics, graphs, pictures, so that you can use them for your own reporting, grant applications, and presentations. I use this tool all the time. It's one of the things that I'm probably using most often. So how does it work? I always like to talk about how these tools work. Where is the information coming from? This tool is pulling data from weather stations dating all the way back to 1950 and is projecting future conditions using climate models that are accounting for both low and high emission scenarios. So you can see in this picture here that I screenshotted, on the left, the gray part of the graph there is looking at historical observations. You can see the dark gray bars are actual observed heat information. And that's averaged over the year. The light gray is showing you that modeled history. And as we get to the current date, once you start going into the future, it kind of starts deviating whether you're looking at lower emission scenarios or higher emission scenarios. And you can also see there's kind of an error bar range that shows you a range of where we are projecting these heat increases. So as we're going into the future, you can see as the further out you get, you can see the deviation between those starts expanding and there's less confidence. But you can see the overall trend is that heat is still increasing. So I want to show you all how to use the tool. So if you find the main page of the Climate Explorer, this is essentially what it looks like. Very simple. You can start by searching either by the county or the city. This one allows you to look at specific cities. I have some example cities for you there, but you can just start typing the name of a city or a county there and it will start auto-filling based on that. It has pretty much every medium to large scale city in the United States. And once you've picked a city or a county and you've clicked search, you'll then see a screen that looks like this. It allows you to look at climate maps, graphs, high tide flooding, which we're not going to focus on today, historical weather data, and historical thresholds. Specifically, what I want to show you all today, though, is the graphs and the tables that are particularly useful for, like I had mentioned earlier, if you're doing planning documents, writing grant applications, or doing different types of reportings or presentations that are incredibly useful to actually give you visual information of what's projected. So we're going to click on that climate graphs one, the one in the top middle there. And this is essentially what you'll see. This one's looking at specifically Baldwin County, Alabama. So you can see the historical trend or the historical average there on the left in the gray. And as we go into the future, you can see the future projections of heat for both the low emission scenario, which is in the blue, and the higher emission scenario, which is in the red. In the top left corner there, you'll see a drop-down menu. This gives you all sorts of various temperature graphs that you can look at. This one is showing the average daily maximum temperatures, but you can actually sort that by all sorts of different thresholds for temperature. So if you want to look at just the number of days above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, you can sort by that as well. You can also toggle from graphs to maps. You can look at comparisons between annual averages and monthly averages. And on the top two, you'll also see that download button that I'll talk about in a second. Across the bottom, you can see there are different components of the graph. You can click on those dark blue buttons and it will actually toggle on and off different components of the map. So if you don't want to look at those dark gray bars that show the historical observations, you can click on that observations button and it'll actually remove those from the graph. Same thing if you don't want the modeled history, click on that light gray modeled history button, removes those. If you only want to look at the lower emission scenario too, click on that higher emission scenario button and it will remove that red line from the graph too. So depending on what it is you're looking for, you can add or remove different types of information to this graph. Now I want to demonstrate just a few little more functions that you can use with this tool. You can adjust the time scale by dragging your cursor on the actual graph. So if you click onto the graph and then start dragging, you'll see that you can actually adjust the time frame that you're looking at. So let's say you only want to look at future projections. You don't want that stuff before the year 2000. Just click and drag on the graph there, and you can eliminate that information. It takes a little bit of getting used to because sometimes you click and drag and it may include areas that you didn't think it was going to include, but you're actually able to pinpoint specific date ranges to actually showcase regions of time that you're more interested in. Or let's say that you want to look at projections only to 2050. You don't want all that stuff beyond 2050. You can click and drag so that it eliminates all of the data beyond 2050 there. So this graph, for example, goes out to 2100. You can make sure that that's not included in your graph. And then where the major functionality comes in is you can actually click that download button there, and it gives you a drop down to actually download this information in various different ways. The way I use it most often is I actually just download the PNG and image that I can then upload into different types of planning documents, grant reporting, or presentations that I'm using. And I'll show you what that looks like here in just 1 second. So once again, I want to review a hypothetical case study to see how you can actually apply this tool to a real life scenario. So let's say you're working for Baldwin County, and they know based on some of those previous tools that we just looked at, that they're facing an increase in heat risk in the coming years. So they want to write a grant to support the purchase of shade structures in various locations throughout the city that can help reduce heat risk. So if you're a grant administrator for Baldwin County, they want to make sure that they can include historical heat data and future projections to justify this project and the necessity of including these types of heat or the shade structures within the city's planning for the future. So what you see here is what the actual downloaded pictures look like when you're downloading that data as a PNG from the Climate Explorer. It gives you this really high resolution graph that you can then download and then copy and paste into any types of planning documents or grant proposals that you're actually creating. So depending on what type of time frame you're looking at, or whether you're looking at high emission scenarios and low emission scenarios, whether you want historical data or just want to focus in on the future, you can customize these graphs to give it exactly what you want. And remember too, these are locally specific to that exact city or county. So if I'm writing that grant, I can download the PNG image of each of these graphs and include that in that proposal to show how future projections justify the need for these shade structures. Because as you can see, heat is increasing, and thus the heat risk for our populations is increasing as well. So these heat structures are much easier to justify. We can actually prove with evidence that there are going to be changes in the future that are going to need to accommodate. Let's look at one more example too. Talk about air conditioning, HVAC units. The city of Biloxi wants to write a grant for funds to replace or upgrade the HVAC units for its municipal buildings. Because as we've seen, as we go into the future, there's going to be an increase in heat, not just here, but across the country. And what we're seeing all over the place is that our previous infrastructure, our HVAC units, are just not cutting it anymore. So the city wants to get ahead of the curve and look at how projected increases in heat will increase the need for their current HVAC units and how those HVAC units will no longer be sufficient. So they're going to need to find data to justify the purchase of new HVAC units that can handle these higher temperatures. And they're going to need to prove to the city why they need to purchase these HVAC units. So once again, we're going to look at these graphs. Using Climate Explorer, the city looks up projected number of days in Biloxi that will exceed 95 degrees Fahrenheit. That top graph there, you can see the historical observations of the amount of days that have exceeded 95 degrees Fahrenheit. And as you can see, what's happening is as we go into the future, we're seeing more and more days where the temperature is going to be beyond that 95-degree temperature threshold. And we know based off of past experiences that once we get beyond 95 degrees Fahrenheit, our current HVAC units cannot keep up and cool efficiently for as hot as it is outside. So what the city wants to do is they want to look at those past trends and demonstrate that on very hot days that the temperatures are increasing, it's going to be even harder for their existing infrastructure to keep up with those temperatures. And so they want to provide evidence that shows you that there is an increase in the amount of very hot days within the city, thus justifying why they need to invest in infrastructure that's going to be sufficient as we go forward into the future. So we're going to pause again. This is our last question for the day. And we're curious about which of these tools that I just showed you are you most likely to use for your work? Is it the National Weather Service's heat risk tool? Is it the CDC's heat and health tracker? Or is it the Climate Explorer? And if you think that you may use multiple of these tools, you can click multiple of them as well. Remember, the heat risk tool is showing you what is the projected heat risk for the next short period. So looking at 7-day forecasts of heat projections. The CDC's heat and health tracker is showing you who is most affected by that heat. And then the Climate Explorer allows you to look into the future and look at future projections and use that information to justify various different types of projects, proposals, or grants that you might be using to address heat. It's a little bit quicker to answer, so I'll just give you all a few more seconds to answer that one, and we'll move on to the very last part of our presentation. All right, so that was a very short introduction of these 3 tools. If you have any questions now, that would be the time. Put them in the chat, and we can do our best to answer those questions. Remember, though, I'm not the one who developed these tools. I'm simply showcasing the great work that our federal partners and agencies have done to create these tools and maintain access to them for coastal decision makers like yourself, so that you can use them for your communities, for your projects, and for other purposes that are going to be increasingly helpful in the future. One of the things that we would also like to gather from you at this point is we have an evaluation that we're going to put in the chat. We're curious about how we can improve these types of presentations going forward, and if there's any other types of tools that you're aware of specifically that you want to make sure that we can include in future presentations. And remember, if you're looking to get CFM credits, you just put your name in the chat and we can keep track of them that way. We will be providing the recorded video of this presentation, so that will be available at the conclusion. And unless anyone has any other further questions, that's all I have for you today. So I wanted to thank you very much on behalf of the Coast Resilience Institute, the Mississippi-Alabama Sea Grant Consortium, and Mississippi State University Extension Program for participating in this webinar. I hope you learned something new about these tools. Even if these are tools you've used in the past, hopefully you learned something new about how you can apply these tools to real life situations, and maybe you can recommend these tools to some of your other stakeholders in your region that might be curious on how they can find this type of information. Hey, Marissa, I can definitely talk with you. I can email you later. I think I still have your contact information for Southwest Florida, but I can tailor this specifically to certain regions. If someone's curious about how they can apply these tools to a specific city or to a specific county or to projects within a specific region, I can work with y'all to make sure that I can tailor make some case studies that showcase just how useful these tools can be. Um, I don't know any specific county health departments off the top of my head, but that's something that I could inquire and get back to you on. I know that that information is increasing in its accessibility, so working with these different types of healthcare providers and making sure that they're aware of these tools is definitely something we can do in the future to make sure that they're able to assess these conditions and adjust accordingly. Thanks again, everyone. And remember, if you have questions or if you'd like more specific information, if you'd like to work with me on, I can provide information to you on a local scale, or I can give this presentation to a different group that you might have. My contact information is down there at the bottom. Feel free to reach out to me.